We're going to start the deposition by talking a little bit about your expert reports. We'll come back to them. I've marked the expert report of Jeff Wolfe dated September 23rd, 2011 as Exhibit 7556, and I've marked the rebuttal report of Jeff Wolfe dated November 7th, 2011 as Exhibit 7557. Are these your two expert reports in this matter, sir?
Yes, they are.
Do you hold any certification in marine surveying?
Can you be more specific about what sort of surveying?
Marine surveying of yachts and ships. Do you hold any professional certification for surveying vessels of any sort?
Yes.
What's that certification?
I attended an ISM auditor's course in roughly, it was around 2000 as part of my Coast Guard training.
Okay. Did you get a certification from the ISM auditor's course?
As a lead auditor.
When was that issued?
Around the 2000 time frame.
Who gave the course?
It was either taught by Lloyd's or DNV. It was, it was a Coast Guard contracted training in their training center in Yorktown, and they hired this entity as a contractor to come in and teach the course.
Yorktown, Virginia?
Yorktown, Virginia, yes, sir.
Mm-hmm. How many days or weeks was that course?
It was 5 days.
Were they 8-hour days?
8 hours plus homework.
Do you have any licenses can you hold yourself out in your regular marketing CV as a qualified marine surveyor?
Objection form.
I'm a qualified, I was, before I retired from the Coast Guard, I was a double-ended qualified marine inspector.
If someone said, I have an offshore supply vessel and I need a hull and condition survey, are you a licensed surveyor entitled to conduct such a survey and sign your name to it? Would you be able to say yes?
I can do the survey, but I do not have a license as a surveyor.
You were in the Coast Guard from 1981 till what retirement date? June
1st of 2008.
Okay, that's 27 years. And you retired as a lieutenant commander?
That's correct.
What was your first rank in the Coast Guard?
I was enlisted as an E1.
Okay, I'm going to fill in a few years in there. When did you become a CWO?
C81. Let me think. 1990, approximately, 89 or 90.
Okay, and when were you commissioned as a lieutenant?
2002.
Okay, and then did you go from lieutenant to lieutenant commander?
Yes.
When did you become lieutenant commander?
Around 2006.
Okay. So you acted in the capacity, you could be called lieutenant commander from 2006 until June 1st, 2008?
Yes.
Did you retire on your own volition after 27 years?
Yes.
Do you receive any pension from the Coast Guard?
Yes.
I see from your Appendix 1 CV that you became a senior marine inspector and you put the years 1997 to 2000 out of MSO New Orleans. Is that right?
From 2000, from marine inspector? No, that would have been back in 97.
So you were a senior marine inspector for just shy of 3 years?
That's correct. Well, maybe I shouldn't say it that way. I was always considered to be a senior marine inspector. It's just that what this shows is a job break between general inspection duties of various types of vessels and some MODUs to being actually responsible for the offshore area of MSO New Orleans.
So when you were in the years 97 to year 2000, you would be a senior marine inspector visiting all types of vessels within the MSO jurisdiction?
Well, when you say, yes, within the MSO jurisdiction, including their jurisdiction in South America and the Caribbean.
MSO New Orleans encompasses part of the Gulf of Mexico?
MSO New Orleans has a zone in the Gulf of Mexico, yes.
Right. So during that time frame, 97 to 2000, would you have had senior marine inspection duties for offshore DP MODUs or self-propelled MODUs?
I assisted the what was the incumbent of the Chief of Offshore Activities. I assisted him in conducting inspections.
He would be the one who would sign any letters of compliance?
I think either one of us could do that, but he would be the lead inspector.
Okay. Now, starting in May of 2000, you became Chief Offshore Activities, MSO New Orleans, May 2000, June 2004, is that correct?
That's correct, when he retired.
Were you Chief, when you were Chief Offshore Activities, did your jurisdiction also include ships and barges in the Port of New Orleans area?
I was strictly focused on offshore, the offshore industry at that point.
Okay, so we can safely say that beginning in June 2004, as Chief of Offshore Activities out of MSO New Orleans, your responsibilities included either inspection yourself or oversight of inspection of MODUs of one sort or another, correct?
MODUs as well as OSVs, and as I said again, if I was going to, say for example, Mexico to inspect a MODU and there was a couple of OSVs that were also due for inspection, I would do those as well.
Okay, so the geographical territory in your job as Chief Offshore Inspection included what foreign states?
Mexico, all of South America. Let me rephrase that. The east coast of Mexico, and then all of Central and South America, and the greater Caribbean.
And then also the zone in the Gulf of Mexico that MSO New Orleans was responsible for?
Right.
All right. So how many, with you as chief, how many inspectors worked within that group or detail or team to cover that territory?
I had one full-time, and then there were 3 or 4 other guys that had MODU qualification that I would use when we were actually doing inspections, but they weren't physically in the same office with me.
Okay. So during that time period, 2000 to 04, you had that geographic territory, including offshore supply vessels, MODUs, in the geographic region you've just described?
Yes.
And in addition to OSVs, MODUs, would any, and jackups would be considered a MODU?
That's correct.
So we've talked about self-propelled MODUs, we've talked about dynamically positioned vessels. What is a jackup? What's the terminology for a jackup if MODU is associated with a jackup?
Well, the term is a self-elevating mobile offshore drilling unit.
Okay. Self-elevating
Self-elevating.
MODU. And those are towed to their location, correct?
Generally, yes.
Then you moved in 2004 through June 2008 to Chief Offshore Compliance, 8th USCG District. How did your job duties change at that point?
Well, I didn't do near as many inspections as I had been doing at a working MSO. It was more of an oversight and working toward building or strengthening or modifying the regulatory regime. But my territory covered all of the areas of the Gulf of Mexico that had active offshore activities.
Okay. Fair to say, though, that if, assuming the Deepwater Horizon was operating either under the flag of Panama or the flag of the Republic of the Marshall Islands between 2001 and your date of your retirement in 2008, that the Deepwater Horizon was within your jurisdiction regulatorily?
From 2004 to 2008, yes.
Okay. Between 2001 and June 2004, when you were chief offshore activities, if we assume for the purposes of this question that the Deepwater Horizon was within the geographic zone that MSO New Orleans covered, would she have been within your regulatory jurisdiction during that time frame?
Had she been operating within the zone, yes.
Okay. So fair to say that at least at some point during the latter years that Deepwater Horizon operated in the Gulf of Mexico, you personally had regulatory oversight over Deepwater Horizon.
If you're asking, was she within the geographic boundaries of the 8th Coast Guard District, yes.
Do you hold any maritime license as an engineer of any level?
No, I do not.
Do you hold any deck officer licenses?
No, I do not.
Have you ever commanded a vessel at sea?
No, I have not.
Have you ever been the shoreside supervisor of a person who commands a vessel at sea?
No.
In looking at this resume, I couldn't determine whether you had ever served in any seaman's capacity for the Coast Guard. One item possibly triggers that. It says USCG cutter Acushnet, various shipboard engineering duties, June 81 to June 84. It appears that possibly during that time frame you worked aboard a ship. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
The cutter Acushnet?
Yes.
And that's Acushnet. Where was the Acushnet stationed?
In Gulfport, Mississippi.
Okay. I think I know I asked this, but there was a captain aboard the
Yes.
cutter.
Yes.
Were there two captains at any one time?
No.
During the period of time when the Coast Guard admiral would come aboard, who was the captain of the ship?
It was still the captain.
Was it important for you as a first-class petty officer to know who was the commander of your ship?
Yeah, it would be very important to recognize the captain, yes, in a military setting.
Have you ever been a seaman aboard any civilian ship?
No, I have not.
After you left the Acushnet in June of '84, did you ever work as a full-time seaman aboard any other Coast Guard ship?
No.
Have you ever been to well control school?
I've been to a well control school, yes.
Was it a fundamentals of well control or a supervisor's level of well control school?
It was fundamentals.
How long did the course take?
I think it was, if I recall, it was 3 or 4 days.
Fundamentals of well control book, as well as the classroom experience, showed you what a well was, what casing was, what a drill string was, what a blowout preventer was.
Yes.
Among other things.
Among other things.
Yeah. And did you have any hands-on training at Randy Smith?
They have a simulator.
So you have console showing
returns and yes.
Have you ever attended any schools in fire and gas detection systems on board offshore vessels?
Well, I've attended, I don't know if I would use the term school, but certainly that was part of our inspectors training that was held in Yorktown to understand fire and gas systems, yes.
How many DP module inspection or examinations had you personally conducted, either as a junior person or the senior person?
DP modules, I don't know, probably 8 or 10 different modules. The Deepwater Horizon is a classic example that oftentimes they would stay in the Gulf for long periods of time. So while it may be 8 or 10 different MODUs, you may inspect the same one 3 or 4 times.
Mm-hmm. So is your answer that you've personally been involved in an inspection or an examination of 8 or 10 different DP modules, meaning any one of those 8 or 10 you might have been aboard more than once?
When you say dynamic position, if you're including drill ships in that as well.
Yeah, so 8 or 10?
8 or 10.
In this case, when were you retained to start reviewing materials, do work?
In August of this year.
Okay, so your expert report of September 23 was after approximately 7 or 8 weeks of work?
7 or 8 weeks of very intense work, yes.
Since April 20th, 2010, have you been on any Transocean rigs?
Yes, I have.
Which ones?
The Nautilus.
All right. Now, how long were you on the Nautilus?
Around 6 hours, I would say.
When you're in the cabin of the Deepwater, of the Nautilus, in a view similar to what this camera is showing in Figure 7, are you looking out through those windows on the drill floor?
You can see the drill floor, yes.
What areas of the Nautilus did you visit during those 6 hours?
We spent some time on the bridge. We spent some time on in the driller's console, engine rooms, and beyond that, it was more or less the Nautilus was very similar in layout, not exact, but very similar in main deck layout, and so we spent some time looking at the main deck layout and looking at paths that people probably would have used in the evacuation.
Based on your review of the materials in this matter, would you agree with me that BP was justified in relying upon Transocean to have the primary responsibility for implementation and management of a safety management system?
I think the way I would respond to that is that, yes, I understand that it was Transocean's responsibility to implement a safety management system. I think it would be also incumbent on the operator to ensure that it actually had been implemented.
Okay, so it was incumbent on BP to make sure that Transocean had implemented a safety management system for Deepwater Horizon.
I'm sure as part of their, I haven't seen this discussed, maybe I have. I mean, to ensure that they had all of the requisite documents and that it had been, their safety management system had been accepted by the RO on behalf of the flag state, I think that would be a BP function that they would ask for copies of those certificates or view those certificates.
And you in fact know that BP did that in this case, correct?
I can't recall specifically, but that would be normal.
Okay, and you've seen no evidence in the record to suggest that BP did not rely upon Transocean's presentation of proper certificates from the RO regarding its safety management system?
I don't recall. There's nothing that comes to mind at the moment that I would recall.
Okay, and that minimum safe manning certificate has two positions relevant to our current discussion. It has the master position and it has the OIM position listed, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and is it your testimony as an expert in this case that because both of those positions are listed on the minimum safe manning certificate for a DPV, that the operator of said vessel has to have each of them be in command of different aspects of the vessel?
Yeah. The word command, understand from my military background, there was only one person in command.
Who was in command on Deepwater Horizon during the afternoon of April the 20th?
Captain Gupta.
Okay. Did he know that?
Yes, he knew it.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. Just off the top of your head, the minimum safe manning certificate issued by the Republic of the Marshall Islands classified the Deepwater Horizon as a self-propelled module, did it not?
The original?
The original that was in place on April the 20th, 2010.
Yes.
And that minimum safe manning certificate did not require the presence of both an OIM and a master, correct?
The certificate did not, but it's in the Marshall Islands report, as they point out, that was a clerical error. Mm-hmm. But I think Transocean certainly could look at the Marshall Islands manning document and realize that, yes, they were, in fact, expected to have a master and an OIM.
Let's talk about the command structure on board Deepwater Horizon. Do you understand, and is it your expert opinion, that that is a command structure imposed or placed or implemented aboard at least the Deepwater Horizon by the management of Transocean?
Well, I don't think they really had much of a choice, because the Marshall Islands Safe Manning Certificate said they had to have a master and an OIM.
Okay. Well, wouldn't you agree with me, sir, that in the command structure of the Deepwater Horizon, the master was subservient to the OIM?
No.
To whom did the master report on board the Deepwater Horizon?
When they were on location, when you say report, you mean on a daily basis?
To whom did he report in the hierarchical structure at Deepwater Horizon? In the command structure at Deepwater Horizon, to whom did the master report?
When they were on location, he reported to the OIM, but that, like I said, it didn't change the fact that he was still the captain. It's just that they were engaged in an industrial activity at that time.
Do you know of any ship in the fleet of Coast Guard ships that has a command structure whereby the PIC shifts depending on the function of the ship?
On a Coast Guard ship?
Right.
No, I'm not aware of one.
Let's talk, for example, about a buoy tender. You may not have worked aboard one or in connection with one, but you know the Coast Guard employs buoy tenders on the inland river system and harbors.
Yes.
And the buoy tender has a very specific function of maintaining buoys in navigable waterways, correct?
That's correct.
And there are persons aboard the buoy tender who are expert in the placement, the pulling up of a buoy and the maintenance of a buoy, and then the replacement of a buoy, right?
Yes.
And those buoys have to be placed in a very exact location, right?
Yes.
So that mariners can engage in safe navigation relying upon the buoy system, right?
That's correct.
But the buoy tender employed by the Coast Guard has one person in charge at all times, right?
The master.
Let's take a look at two sentences under chain of command and go into some detail on them. Your first sentence states, I have concluded that the command structure as established on the Deepwater Horizon was appropriate and in accordance with industry standards as well as all applicable laws and regulations. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
Is that still your opinion today?
Yes, it is.
And have you ever, in your training and experience, heard the adage or the statement that every minute counts in an emergency?
I've heard that term before, yes.
Okay. From a Marine perspective, would you agree with me that the spewing of well fluids above the rotary table and up into the derrick was a significant event?
It would have been definitely a significant event, primarily for the drill crew, but certainly in the greater context of the operation of the rig, yes, that would have been a significant event.
Okay. It's a significant event from the safety of the ship, is it not?
Yes.
Okay, it's not a significant event?
Okay. Objection, let him answer.
I'm going to...
If the well control is such that that's all you get is a spewing of mud, that would be a significant event enough to have concern, but it would not, if you're able to get the well back under control, then there would be no inherent danger from that.
So it's your testimony as an expert in this case that the spewing of mud from the riser above the rotary table and into the derrick may or may not have been a significant event from a marine perspective?
Object to the form.
Again, from the Marine crew's response, that's not something that they would be responsible for determining next actions, course of actions. But that's not to minimize. Anytime you have any kind of well situation, it's an area of concern.
Look at subsection B of what is paragraph 4. And let's read that out loud, or I'll read that out loud together, you follow along. Each ship is in the charge of a master and officers who possess appropriate qualifications, in particular seamanship, navigation, communications, and marine engineering, and that the crew is appropriate in qualification and numbers for the type, size, machinery, and equipment of the ship. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, you did.
Okay, and is that your understanding of what international maritime law requires? That is, each ship must be in the charge of a master?
Yes.
Well, you would agree that the Republic of the Marshall Islands, both, certainly at least in the document we have before us, the Maritime Act makes no provision for the OIM, or Offshore Installation Manager, to have the responsibility for the safety of the crew and the passengers, if any, correct?
The OIM is there for a very specific purpose. He is the guy who's experienced, knowledgeable with the activities related to the industrial function of the vessel, and certainly as those activities would have ramifications for the overall safety, then he is the most appropriate individual to have that responsibility on a day-to-day basis. But that doesn't remove the captain's overriding authority.
Aha. So certainly the OIM is a subject matter, a very important subject matter expert on the Deepwater Horizon, correct?
Yes.
Remember my question, though. It was, does Section 811 of the Maritime Act of the Republic of the Marshall Islands give safety responsibilities for the vessel to the OIM?
No, it does not. Well, I think the document that most of the crew would be familiar with would not be those documents where those types of descriptions are written. That's not what they would focus.
Is your testimony that the rest of the crew would be focused on the station bill and not these other documents?
The station bill would be the premier.
Do you think Yancey Keplinger, David Young, and David Hackney were aware of the station bill?
I believe they would have had to be aware of the station bill.
Okay, well, my question was, is the master in charge of everything?
He's in charge of the safety of the vessel.
Okay. Now, you see on the org chart who the top box is on the org chart?
Yes.
Who is it?
Well, this one says the OIM, but it doesn't. It just says a Deepwater Horizon org chart.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's what this org chart says, right?
Yeah, and obviously this is for on location.
All right.
Not underway.
Mm-hmm. You say obviously. Where does it say that?
Well, it just says underway. The PIC, the master's in charge, and drilling mode, the offshore installation manager is in charge.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, who reports to whom in the org chart?
Objection.
That is between the captain or the master and the OIM.
Objection to the form.
I have actually had quite a bit of struggle with this chart, and I can honestly tell you that it's probably not the best drawn chart, but again, inside the same Deepwater Horizon Emergency Response Manual and in the operations manual, it constantly refers, or I shouldn't say constantly, consistently refers to the master's overall authority.
Okay. You say the emergency response manual contains a statement of the captain's overriding authority?
It does.
Okay. This org chart, though, shows the master reporting to the OIM, does it not?
Yeah, that's what it shows on the chart.
So who is the person in charge during normal day-to-day operations per this document?
Well, in the first, I mean, it talks about the master being the person in charge during emergencies as specified on the station bill. And then it talks about their interpretation of what the person in charge, what their responsibilities are, but it never designates the OIM as the person in charge.
Okay, go back to tab 7 and exhibit 5299, that org chart. Yeah, and you know this org chart is in an official document of Transocean, right?
Yes.
And you see that the official document found in the emergency response manual has two different persons in charge depending on the circumstance, right?
Yes.
And you found this org chart to be a little unclear, fair to say?
Objection to the form.
Well, like I say, I think it indicates the arrangement when the rig is employed drilling wells, which it is 99.9% of the time.
Mm-hmm. And during that 99.9, give or take, percent of time, who is the person in charge?
The OIM.
Okay, and if you turn, let's see, page 3 of this particular integration memo, there's a whole section entitled Marine Operations. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay, and then you see that that when you turn the page, you're still dealing with marine operations, and then you see a paragraph entitled Rig Operations. Do you see that?
Yes.
And do you see Rig Chain of Command?
Yes, I do.
And you know what a chain of command is on a ship, don't you?
Yes, I do.
Okay, let's read together the paragraph that starts the offshore installation manager. Okay, follow along with me. Quote, "The offshore installation manager will remain overall responsible for the health, safety, and welfare of all persons and all activities conducted on board their respective rig. The OIM is authorized and obligated to take whatever actions he considers necessary to prevent injury, loss of life, damage to equipment/structure, and/or loss of rig and well operation integrity." Did I read that correctly?
Yes, you did.
It sounds to me, and I'm asking you what your view is, not mine, that at least among those three individuals, they had three different conceptions of who's in charge at different times. Fair to say?
Objection to the form.
Well, here again, I go back to the distinction I made that the person in charge is not synonymous with the master.
Okay. Is the master sometimes not the person in charge on the Deepwater Horizon?
the master is sometimes not the person in charge.
Have you read this section of the guidance materials for D&V auditors?
Yes, I have.
Do you see that there's a sentence under the box that directly quotes 5.2? There's a sentence that reads, quote, "The overriding authority of the master applies to all circumstances." You see that? And if you turn the page to the last two paragraphs where there's some italicized language, and I'll read it out loud and you follow along. "It is a common misperception that the overriding authority of the master applies to emergencies only. Hence, the statement should make it clear that the overriding authority of the master is not limited to emergency situations. It applies to all circumstances affecting safety and prevention of pollution." And I'll skip the second sentence unless you feel a need to read it. But do you understand that the D&V guidance materials for ISM code auditors under their direction tell their auditors that a statement of the captain's overriding authority in an emergency situation does not suffice for compliance with ISM code section 5.2?
Can you ask that question again? If it said only emergency situations, then that would not be consistent.
Okay, in other words, that would not be in compliance with 5.2, would it?
It would not reflect the intent of 5.2.
Turn to tab 30 in your binder, please. And that page has been previously marked as Exhibit 4647. Are we together on that?
Yes.
Okay, and you see that this is from, I think you mentioned earlier that the Emergency Response Manual for Deepwater Horizon had a number of sections devoted to emergency disconnect procedures, right?
That's correct.
And this is one of those sections, isn't it?
I think this is the introductory page to those sections.
Right, it's section 12, subsection 2, right, in the manual?
That's correct.
Okay, and you see that, like you say, it's an introduction, and it says general considerations, and it talks about DP alert levels, and then there's this sentence in the first paragraph. "The Deepwater Horizon crews will strictly adhere to these alert actions, and EDS drills will be executed weekly." Did I read that sentence correctly?
Yes.
Have you found a document or a witness who validates that EDS drills were conducted weekly on Deepwater Horizon?
No, I haven't.
So it's your opinion that by having Jimmy Harrell as the OIM and PIC during day-to-day operations, that he was the person in charge of the vessel, although Captain Kukta, when he was aboard, was the person in command of the vessel?
That's correct.
Okay. And you don't think having one person being in charge of the vessel and the other person being in command of the vessel creates any confusion? Is that your opinion?
I think I'll restate what I said earlier. I think there might have been a couple of people that maybe were a bit confused, but the Marine crew that was involved on April the 10th or April the 20th of 2010, I don't believe they were confused.
But in the meantime, I'm going to continue with Captain Kuchta in your memory. Did Captain Kuchta have major emergency management training?
Well, depending on if you're asking about the whether he had been trained in emergency response, obviously his STCW training, the Bridge Resource Management training, would cover that. Mm-hmm. But I am aware that there was a there was a specific Transocean sponsored course, and I don't believe he had attended that.
Okay, did you review the fire and gas detection system aboard Deepwater Horizon in your role as an expert for Transocean in this case?
The permanently installed?
Yes.
Yes,
Whose equipment was that?
Transocean.
Okay. Having the ability to move off station for a vessel tethered to a fuel source is an important maritime consideration, is it not?
If the blowout has escalated to that level, then yes, that may be a proper mitigation.
Okay. And the Marine crew has to be ready for that, correct?
Ready to move off station
Yes.
to navigate? Yes.
Now let's go back to the EDS. Is it your testimony that the master was not authorized to initiate an EDS sequence?
I certainly believe he had the authority, but I think what I said earlier today, and I still will stick to that, is that it's not something that he would arbitrarily decide to do without seeking input from his experts.
In your report, did you prepare a timeline of minute-by-minute events on the Deepwater Horizon beginning at any point the evening of April the 20th, 2010?
I didn't prepare a specific timeline, but again, evaluating all of the various accounts, either through Coast Guard witness statements or through other deposition testimony, I reached a conclusion that the events unfolded very rapidly.
And a command decision on the Deepwater Horizon on the night of April the 20th could have been to initiate the EDS sequence, correct?
It could have been, and I think there's very clear evidence that that is exactly what they were trying or attempting to do from the bridge, was to speak to the drill floor and try to, because they had been called and said we have a well control event, and that's what they were doing. They were seeking that information to be well informed.
Okay. And in fact, Chris Pleasant asked the captain 3 different times if he should initiate EDS, did he not?
Objection form.
I don't know if it was 3. I am aware that he did ask the captain, should he EDS.
Right. And in fact, the captain told him, Chris Pleasant, the subsea engineer, calm down, we're not EDSing. That's true, isn't it?
Objection form.
I'd have to go back and reread the testimony to see if those were the exact words, but it was something to that effect.
Have you identified any evidence that there was confusion on the bridge of the Deepwater Horizon on April 20th, 2010 as to who was in command of the vessel following the first explosion?
No, I haven't.
Do you believe that there was confusion on the bridge on April 20th, 2010 following the first explosion as to who is in command of the vessel?
No.
What process safety measures did you evaluate then in evaluating Transocean's culture on the rig?
Their HSE programs, their various permit to work programs, I think those would be the main ones, and their safety record.
What personal safety measures were in place on the Deepwater Horizon?
Oh goodness. There was obviously as common in the industry, there were PPE requirements. There was a permit to work system. There was a job planning. There was 2 safety meetings a day. There were weekly safety meetings. There was a large focus on dropped objects, and there was regular reporting.
Can you identify or recall any process safety measures that were in place on the Deepwater horizon?
Well, that's where trying to separate those two, because oftentimes they intermix, and part of the process safety would be those same types of stop work programs, work planning programs that I talked about. Those would be processes leading to safety.
Your report, going to page 16, goes into this concept of timeout for safety.
Yes.
Which is also known in some industries as stop work authority.
That's correct.
Okay. And on page 16, you state that during rig operations, everyone has the authority, indeed an obligation, to stop work if an activity poses a safety risk of any magnitude. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you consider yourself an expert on personal safety in the oil and gas industry?
Personal safety, yes.
Okay. And if so, what qualifies you?
14 years working offshore for an agency that exists to enhance safety.
Okay. Anything else?
And the various training that I received as part of that program, the Marine Safety Program.
Do you feel qualified to grade Transocean's personal safety on the Deepwater horizon?
Yes.
Okay. And how would you grade it?
Well, I think it's addressed in the safety culture. Everybody who ever, that I could get a hold of their depositions, anybody who had ever been on the rig, found those responsible to be very safety conscious, and they had nothing but good things to say about the safety culture on the horizon.
Okay. And you feel qualified to make that assessment?
Based on my last 14, 15 years in the offshore marine safety program, yes.